All right. This meeting or this round's good to go. You can begin. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Would the plaintiff like to make appearances for the court?
Yes, good morning, Your Honor. My name is Abigail Franke, and along with my co-counsel, Ms. Tatum Pike.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And Mr. Hazak Azam.
Good morning, Your Honor.
We'll be representing the plaintiff, the estate of Genesis Petrillo, in today's case.
Thank you. And if the defense can make appearances.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Kate Kimmel, and along with my co-counsel, McKenna Fitzsimmons.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And Christina St. John.
Good morning, Your Honor.
We will be representing the defendant in today's case.
Thank you and good morning to you all. Plaintiff, do you have any pretrial matters for us today?
Yes, Your Honor. First, prior to the beginning of this trial, you should have received a packet with relevant Midlands case law, the Midlands Rules of Evidence, stipulations, and special instructions. Can you confirm with me that you have received that?
Yes, I have that in front of me.
Thank you, Your Honor. Next, we would like to virtually tender these documents to the bench.
They will so be tendered.
Thank you, Your Honor. Next, we would ask to invoke Rule 603, the constructive swearing in of all witnesses.
Are there any objections from defense counsel?
No, Your Honor.
Perfect. Rule 603 is invoked.
And next, we would ask to invoke Rule 615, the constructive sequestration of all witnesses.
Are there any objections to that, defense counsel?
No.
Perfect. Well, with that, Rule 615 is also invoked.
Also, Your Honor, since this is our first time in your virtual courtroom, would you like us to begin to screen share an exhibit when we lay foundation and are speaking about it, or only screen share an exhibit once it has been entered into evidence?
Do so at your discretion. I believe if you are going to be entering the document into evidence, as soon as the witness is going to be theoretically handed the document, I think that is an appropriate time to screen share.
Yes, Your Honor. Lastly, I would like to point your attention to Stipulation 3, which states that Exhibits 1 through 10 have been pre-admitted in today's proceedings.
Perfect, and that is my understanding of Stipulation 3. It is so noted.
And with that, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Thank you. And does the defense have any pretrial matters they'd like to discuss?
Yes, Your Honor. We just have a couple housekeeping matters. First thing, you may notice that many of our competitors are wearing masks today. That is because our university's COVID policies require that we do so when in rooms with other people. When attorneys are giving speeches and when witnesses are speaking, they will be in a room by themselves, so they don't need to have their masks on. Additionally, some of our competitors will be wearing headsets. That is just so they can hear and be heard better.
Perfect. That is understandable, and the court will take note of that.
And with that, the defense is ready to proceed.
Perfect. Does the plaintiff like to present any opening statements?
May it please the court. Your Honor, closing counsel, members of the jury. It was an accident waiting to happen. On the morning of June the 8th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo was declared dead in the emergency room from pesticide poisoning. In the days leading up to this tragedy, Genesis was in the final stages of marrying the love of his life, Casey Soto. And on the morning of their wedding, before that moment of happiness, Genesis died. Not through any fault of his own, but as we'll show you, because of the deliberate carelessness of Peony Estates. Carelessness in their handling of pesticides throughout their winery. Carelessness, which they had been warned about multiple times. Carelessness, which, as the employees of Peony Estates themselves will tell you today, they knew could cost a life. And it did. Members of the jury, due to the carelessness of Peony Estates, This was an accident waiting to happen, and Genesis Petrillo was that accident. But why does this sad tale deserve to be put in court today? Because it is evident that Peony Estates failed to exercise reasonable care in their actions. They failed to take into account the potential harm they might cause towards those they had a responsibility towards. Harm that was inflicted upon the person of Genesis Petrillo when their employees, due to their own recklessness and irresponsibility, allowed pesticides to slip into a bottle of 2019 Peony Estate Cara wine that Genesis Petrillo and only Genesis Petrillo drank, for subsequently dying hours later from pesticide poisoning. And that is why we, the plaintiff, have filed a claim for negligence per se against Peony Estates. And to prove this, we must meet our burdens through a preponderance of evidence. What we simply mean by this is that we must show to you that it is more likely than not that Peony Estates is negligent. And to demonstrate this, we must show you two things. One, that Peony Estates failed to exercise reasonable care towards those they had a responsibility to, and by doing so, violated health code statutes of the state of Midlands. And two, as a direct result of this, the plaintiff, Genesis Petrillo, was actively harmed. And we'll show this to you throughout today's session when we call 3 witnesses to the stand. We'll show this to you when we call upon Health Inspector Adkins O'Keefe to testify on the multiple and repeated health code violations committed by Peony Estates for 4 years, from 2015 to 2019, how the inspector warned them about their mishandling and misstorage of pesticides throughout the winery and within the winery's bottling area itself, and how after nearly each inspection, they had not rectified the conditions that made the wine production process at Peony Estates an accident waiting to happen. We'll show this to you when we call upon Danny Francasio, who will reveal to you how Harper Martini, the owner of Peony Estates, disclosed the fact that they were suffering from a massive pest infestation across the winery and in the winery's bottling areas themselves. And in their desperate efforts to contain it, were actively disregarding the law on how to properly utilize and store pesticides without harming their patrons, without creating an accident waiting to happen. And we'll show this to you when we call upon Dr. Jameen Kwan to give his expert opinion that Genesis Petrillo, upon being the only one to drink the only bottle of 2019 Peony Estate Cara wine, subsequently died from pesticide poisoning. Pesticide poisoning that was caused by the negligence of Peony Estates. Members of the jury, I, along with my co-counsels, will prove to you today why, due to the recklessness and irresponsibility of the employees of Peony Estates, they created an environment which was an accident waiting to happen. And that the only just verdict you can come to is to find Peony Estates liable. Thank you.
Thank you, plaintiff's counsel. Would the defense like to prepare opening statements?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Narrowed views, biased results. The plaintiff found exactly what they were looking for. Someone to blame for Genesis Petrillo's death. Scrambling to find some sort of explanation for this tragedy, they pointed their finger at the first target that came to mind: the winery that hosted Genesis and Casey's wedding. Let me paint you a picture. Harper Martini has a passion for her business, Peony Estates, a winery in Rapid River Valley. She spent years learning the craft, meeting the people of Rapid River Valley, and saving up until she could finally open up a winery of her own. Over the years, Harper has grown to love this small town and build connections with all of her customers. Because of this, she's made sure to follow every necessary precaution to keep people safe. She trained all her employees, listened to the experts, and implemented the best safety practices. She worked hard to establish her business, and she would never jeopardize the safety of her customers. In today's case, the plaintiff will try to convince you that Peony Estates violated a statute. This statute is meant to protect the public from exposure to pesticides. It's the plaintiff that has the burden of proof in today's case. They have to show you that it is more likely than not that Peony Estates violated this statute. Not possibly likely, not equally as likely, but more likely than not. And the evidence will show that the plaintiff will fail to meet this burden. We as the defense have no obligation to show you any evidence in today's case. But we're going to present you with all the facts that they don't want to show you. First, you'll hear from Austin Lewis, a trusted worker at Peony Estates. You'll hear from Ms. Lewis that Peony Estates followed every single FDA guideline that was set. They threw out any bad grapes, trained every employee about the safety precautions, and did everything in their power to protect their clients. You'll also hear that the bottle of Cara wine that Genesis drank from was found in a dumpster with an open bottle of pesticides. Ms. Lewis will tell you that there's no other way the pesticide could have gotten into that bottle before it made it to the trash can. Next, you'll hear from Dr. Cannon, a specialist in toxicology. Dr. Cannon will review the findings of the doctors in the emergency room who treated Genesis. He'll tell you that they rushed to a conclusion without really considering all of the evidence. He'll give you reasons to doubt the results of Dr. Kwan's cause of death. Something like an allergic reaction could be the cause of Genesis's death, not pesticide poisoning. Finally, you're going to hear from Sam Arnold, a popular local caterer. Ms. Arnold will walk you through the safe practices for venues of how they should set up and clean up their kitchen areas. You're going to hear that on the day of Genesis and Casey's rehearsal dinner, Miss Arnold was at Peony Estates, and that Peony Estates was clean, safe, and pesticide-free. She'll give you reason to doubt that Peony Estates even came close to violating this statute. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, narrowed views will always lead to biased results. The plaintiff decided that Peony Estates was liable, and they looked for any evidence they could scrounge up to support it. They concocted a story to fit their narrative, instead of looking at all the available facts. Because of this, at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, McKenna Fitzsimmons, will come before you and ask you to find Peony Estates not liable. Do not let their narrowed views bias the results of this case. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Does the plaintiff like to present any witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we would like to call Mrs. Riley Adkins O'Keefe.
Thank you, Ms. Adkins. If you could please come up to the stand. And counsel, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Riley. My apologies. I have an unstable internet connection, so I believe I need to repeat that. My name is Riley Adkins O'Keefe.
Of course, thank you. Now, what do you do for your what do you do for your job?
I am the Senior Health and Safety Inspector for the Rapid River County Department of Health and Environmental Services, or DHES for short.
What do you do as a health and safety inspector?
It's my job to make sure that establishments are up to FDA code on a variety of different categories, such as disease control, cleanliness, sanitary operations, and the works.
Why is it so important to keep up these rules and standards?
Well, if they aren't followed, then that could lead to a variety of different issues, such as injuries or chronic and acute illnesses, but in the worst case, possibly even death.
Now, Miss Atkins, what kind of inspections do you do in your line of work?
All kinds, really, but I primarily focus on wineries.
How much experience would you say you have inspecting wineries?
I have done over 170 FDA level winery inspections, and I've been doing them ever since the very beginning, since DHES was first regulated to do so by the FDA.
Now, Miss O'Keefe, why are you here today?
I'm here to testify on my findings at Peony Estates in 2015, 2018, and 2019.
How long have you been an inspector at Peony Estates?
Since 2015.
And what was your first impression of Peony Estates?
Good. They maintained a clean, well-organized facility with the exception of a pesticide storage issue.
What was this pesticide storage issue?
Pesticides were being stored too close to the kitchen and the bottling equipment.
Why is it important to keep up these pesticide standards?
Well, if they aren't followed, as was the case in Peony Estates, then it could lead to serious health issues and possibly even death.
Did you tell anyone about your findings?
Yes, I informed the owner, Harper Martini, and made sure that they moved the pesticides to a more compliant location, so as in 50 feet away from the equipment.
Was this the last time you worked with Peony Estates?
No. In 2018, I received an anonymous tip that Peony Estates was was not following standards.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Plaintiff's counsel, what is your response to this objection?
Your Honor, if I may, which exact statement are you objecting to?
As to the contents of the anonymous tip,
Your Honor, the anonymous tip, we're not offering it for the truth of the matter. Mrs. Riley Atkins O'Keefe couldn't have known if this anonymous tip was true or if it really did have any truth value, but it is her job as a health and safety inspector to act upon these tips, whether or not they have truthful information in them and whether or not they are true. So in this case, this inspector was simply acting upon this anonymous tip. She had no way of knowing before her inspection whether or not it was true.
Your Honor, if I may be heard on those grounds.
Well, you may.
If the contents of the anonymous tip are not being offered for the truth of the matter, then simply saying that she received an anonymous tip that prompted her to return to Peony Estates is sufficient, and the contents of that tip are hearsay and are inadmissible. I ask that we strike the contents of the tip and simply just say she received a tip and that's why she returned.
I'm inclined to agree with that last point from defense counsel. Plaintiff, if you could just limit it to the tip and the subsequent actions of Miss Atkins, that would be perfect. With that, I'm going to sustain the objection. You may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, what kind of standards was Peony Estates not following here?
There were bugs in the cellar.
And why are bugs a health issue?
Well, if they got into the wine or into the bottling equipment, then it poses the risk for contamination.
And how do you get rid of bugs?
If they're already infesting the place, as they were in Peony Estates, then the best thing to do is just spray some pesticide.
And how do you ensure that the wine or any of the equipment isn't contaminated while using pesticide?
Well, you first need to remove all of the equipment from the room and all of the wine barrels. Then spray the pesticides, wait 48 hours before moving anything back into the room.
And how was Peony Estates storing their pesticides in this inspection?
They had a storage shed within adequate distance, so within those 50 feet guidelines, but I had my concerns.
What do you mean?
Well, to put it frankly, it was an inconvenience. I mean, Austin Lewis said that.
As to relevance of Ms. Adkins O'Keefe's concerns,
Your Honor, if I may.
You may.
We are offering this for the subsequent action of this inspector's findings. Again, this is the inspector's job to make a thorough inspection of Peony Estates. We are offering this to show Mrs. Riley Adkins O'Keefe's thoughts on how Peony Estates was properly or improperly storing their pesticides. And if this inspector may be allowed to continue her answer, you will see that she states that she had concerns about how they were storing their pesticides and that the employees didn't want to make the trip there, showing that it could lead to improper pesticide storage.
Defense counsel, do you have a response to this idea of a subsequent action?
yes, Your Honor, if the subsequent action is to investigate within, that's fine, but I'm concerned by the proffer that plaintiff's counsel just made as to what the employees wanted to do. That is purely speculative.
Defense counsel, I think I agree with you on this. However, I think I would like to hear the full answer from Ms. Adkins. If you do believe that it is still irrelevant afterwards, please feel free to re-raise your objection.
Yes.
And at this time, I'm going to overrule it.
Let me rephrase this question. Mrs. O'Keefe, did anyone tell you anything about an inconvenience with storing their pesticides?
Yes, because of the location, Austin Lewis explained to me that employees were less willing to make the trek all the way out to the storage shed, which thus could lead to improper storage.
Right, and what did you do with your concerns?
Well, based off of the concerns I found, I decided to have a follow-up inspection in the next year to make sure that Peony Estates was maintaining these guidelines.
When did you have this follow-up inspection?
On May 8th of 2019.
And what were the results of this inspection?
Well, I found not one, not two, but 4 major health code violations, 3 of which were related to pesticide use.
And where did you find these health code violations?
They were all in the bottling area of the facility.
What was the first issue related to pesticides?
First, there were pesticides just lying out in the open.
And why is this an issue?
Well, pesticides out in the open pose a major risk for contamination, and if that got into the wine or the bottling equipment, it would lead to serious consequences.
What was the second issue surrounding pesticides?
The employees were not able to tell me proper pesticide storage procedure, and the bottling employees in particular couldn't even tell me why it was important to keep pesticides out of the wine.
Why is it so important that employees know this?
This is huge. Toxic chemicals should not be mixed with beverages.
And what was the third problem with pesticides?
Third, there was a bottle of wine labeled Cara sitting right next to a pesticide container.
Why is this an issue?
That put that particular bottle at an extremely high risk for contamination.
Did you tell anyone to get rid of the bottle?
Yes, I informed one of the employees, Kirby Doolittle, I believe was their name.
And what were the results of this inspection? What did you decide to do?
Based off of the 4 major areas of health code violations that I saw, I decided to put Peony Estates on probation.
What does probation mean for a winery?
It means I would visit unexpectedly sometime in the next 45 days to make sure that they had fixed all of their issues.
And what would happen if they didn't fix all of their issues?
If the issues were not resolved, then they would need to suspend all of their operations.
When did you make your next visit?
On May 30th of 2019, so in that 45-day period.
Were these health code violations resolved?
Yes, they all appeared to be resolved.
Did you see anything concerning in your visit?
Well, there was a bottle of Cara wine sitting on the same shelf in the same location as the other one.
Why did this look concerning?
Well, it appeared to be the very same bottle of wine I told Doolittle to dispose of.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Ms. Fitzsimmons, do you have a cross-examination of this witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Ms. O'Keefe, I want to start by talking about your visit to Peony Estates on July 12th of 2018. You began that day by inspecting the premises.
Yes, I did.
You mentioned on direct examination that you found there was a pest problem.
Yes, there were beetles and mites in the cellar.
And that Peony Estates had remedied this problem by using pesticides, correct?
Yes, they used Bug Off, which is an organic phosphate-based pesticide.
And on that day, you tested a random sample of 20% of the barrels of wine to test the pesticide levels, didn't you?
Yes, as is standard procedure.
And none of the barrels you tested were found to have any harmful levels of contaminants.
No, not in the 2018.
Next, you asked where the pesticides were stored.
Yes.
You found out that Harper Martini had followed your instructions from the last visit to move the pesticides further from the production facility.
Yes, in the 2018 visit, she did build another storage shed.
And this was an adequate distance away from the facility.
Yes, that's correct.
In fact, it wasn't just an adequate distance. She moved the storage of the pesticides to a place on the opposite side of the vineyard, farther than the required 50 feet of the production area.
Yes, that's correct.
And you suggested at that time she build a new shed closer to the production facilities.
Yes, to have a pesticide storage shed in the complete opposite end of the vineyard, while it does fit protocol, it poses a greater risk that employees will start to become negligent in their actions around pesticides.
Right. So at that time, you suggested she build a new shed closer to the production facilities.
Yes, that's correct.
So now let's talk about what you found when you returned about a year later on May 8th of 2019. You once again inspected the premises.
Yes, that's correct.
You found that the cellar was clean.
Yes.
You found that it was well organized.
Yes, that's correct.
You found that it was free of pests.
Yes, the cellar had seemed to fix all of their pest issues.
You once again asked where the pesticides were kept.
That is correct.
And you found out that yet again, Harper Martini had followed your instructions from the last visit and moved the storage facility to where you suggested she put it.
Yes, that is, and I'm grateful that she followed my instructions.
At this time, you made a list of 4 items for Peony Estates to correct within the next 45 days. Isn't that right?
Yes, based off of, again, those 4 health code violations that I found.
Your Honor, may I make use of a visual aid at this time?
Plaintiff's counsel, do you have any objections to that?
No, Your Honor.
Then you may.
Just a moment, Your Honor, sorry. Okay, so on that day, on May 8th of 2018, You first suggested that the Peony Estates store the pesticides only in a storage facility at least 50 feet from any production area.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I did say that.
You next asked that they keep all bottles of wine far from any pesticide containers.
Yes, that's correct.
You then asked that they remove any item in the floor drain of the bottling area to assure adequate drainage.
Yes.
And you finally asked them to retrain all employees regarding safe handling and storage of pesticides.
Yes, that's correct.
So then on May 30th, you came back to follow up on these items, right?
Yes, as is necessary with probation.
This was a surprise inspection.
Yes.
They had no way of knowing that that was the day you were going to come back.
No, no way.
So let's go through each item that you inspected on that day. First, you checked on the first recommendation you made, and you found that all pesticides were stored a safe distance from the production and storage areas.
Yes, they seemed to have followed all FDA protocol on this.
So the first issue you found on May 8th had been corrected by May 30th.
Yes, it was within adequate distance.
So now the second thing you mentioned was you didn't see any wine bottles that were close to pesticide containers.
No, not ones that had been close to or any particular way of asserting beyond a reasonable doubt that they were that bottle, but there was a bottle of Cara wine in the same location as the previous one I had told Doolittle to dispose of.
But you have absolutely no way of ascertaining if this was the same bottle of Cara wine.
No way of knowing in absolute certainty, but Harper Martini told me that there were 2 bottles of wine, one of which had been disposed of, and another one which she placed in the exact same location, just out of chance.
So Harper Martini told you herself this was a different bottle of wine.
Harper told me. I had my doubts. But yes, that's correct. For all I know, they could have been 2 separate bottles.
Miss O'Keefe, I'm not asking about your doubts. I'm asking about what you saw and what you were told that day. On that day, Harper Martini told you it was a different bottle of wine.
Yes.
And so you marked that issue as corrected.
Yes, I did.
So now let's talk about the third issue that you brought up on May 8th. You tested the drain. You found it was clear of debris and properly functioning.
Yes, I allowed water to flow for 5 minutes and there was no drainage issues resolved.
So this issue was corrected on May 30th.
Yes.
So finally, you asked to make sure that all employees had gotten their proper training.
Yes, and while I did not speak to any employees on this particular investigation, Harper did show me a PowerPoint presentation and was able to walk me through proper procedure.
And you confirmed that that PowerPoint presentation was sufficient for retraining the employees.
Yes.
Harper Martini even showed you detailed records of the training sessions that had covered all of the employees.
Yes, that's correct.
So you marked this issue as corrected on May 30th.
Yes, I did.
So seeing that all 4 of the issues that you had brought up on May 8th were corrected by May 30th, you lifted the probationary status.
All on paper, all 4 issues were corrected because I had no way of proving that that wine bottle was a separate wine bottle.
Miss O'Keefe, you're a qualified inspector.
Absolutely. I am the senior inspector for the Rapid River County.
You take pride in your work.
Yes, I do. I love making sure that I can keep my community safe.
You would never allow a food operation site to continue to produce things that you felt were unsafe.
No.
So you had the feeling that everything was safe and everything was corrected, and you once again lifted the probationary status.
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Fitzsimmons. Ms. Pike, do you have any redirect for this witness?
Not at this time, Your Honor. I just asked that the witness be able to step down.
Ms. Atkins, you are excused. And does the plaintiff, or would the plaintiff like to call any further witnesses?
The plaintiff calls upon Danny Francasio to stand.
Mr. Francasi, if you could please take the stand. And plaintiff's counsel, can you pronounce your last name for me, please?
Azam.
Azam, thank you. Mr. Azam, you may proceed when you're ready.
Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
I'm Danny Francasio.
And what do you do for a living, Mr. Francasio?
Well, I make the best dang wine in Midlands. I've been running this winery, Rosie and Pedro, for the last 15 years of my life or so.
And what made you get into the wine business?
Well, I'm going to be real with you. I've always admired wine from a very young age. So, I went to college and I wanted to learn about the science of grapes. And so I majored in biology, and someone told me that actually had a future, but apparently it doesn't. So I got an MBA, and then I bought a winery, and now I'm making wine.
And what experience do you have in the wine industry?
Well, aside from being a connoisseur, I'm mostly familiar with basically anything there is to know about the process of making the wine. Harvesting, pressing, destemming, pouring, all of it. I'm pretty skilled at it.
And what brings you into court today?
Well, so aside from being an awesome thing to do, there's also a much darker side to this magic. And if you don't get the process down to a T, you can seriously hurt or injure somebody, whether it's right there the year that you do it, or even a few years down the line, if you have like aged wine.
And what is your relationship with Peony Estates?
Well, the current owner, Harper Martini, actually used to work for me at my winery before quitting. She actually really rose through the ranks there.
What did Harper Martini do while working for you?
Well, she basically did a lot of the day-to-day processes, like, grounds work. One thing that she really did a lot of was just monitoring for pests. And if there were pests, she and I would then use pesticides on them.
Did Harper ever participate in the use of pesticides?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I want to say 5 or 6 times.
And what precautions do you have to take as an owner when using pesticides?
Well, you need to be very careful not to get it in the grapes or the wine, because I'm going to be real with you. I told this to Harper when we were working together, but if you do, you can seriously hurt or injure people, and it's not only the wrong thing to do, it's against the law.
Objection, hearsay.
Your Honor, we are not offering this for the truth of the matter. We are offering this to demonstrate the subsequent action, the effect it would have on Harper Martini, which we are just about to get to.
Mr. Azam, could you entertain me, or at least explain to me exactly what the subsequent action or response from the listener is?
That will be my next question, which will be that Harper Martini, upon hearing this information and upon studying and working under Danny Francasio after all these times, would quit and then go and join her own winery.
And Counselor, to be clear as to what you just said, are you saying that in response to these specific statements, Ms. Martini quit?
In response to studying under Danny Francasio, and after studying under and after learning all of this knowledge from him over the years, she did indeed quit. We are not offering Danny Francasio's statement at this time for the truth value of it. We're just simply trying to show you that upon hearing this and upon absorbing this information, Ms. Martini eventually did quit.
Defense counsel, what is your response to plaintiff's argument?
Your Honor, Mr. Francasio's statements about how he taught Harper everything he knows about the winery has no effect on whether or not she quit later. It goes to show you exactly what he told her, and Mr. Francasio's statements are hearsay in this case.
I'm inclined to believe with defense counsel, it seems to me like these statements are being used for the truth of the matter asserted, so I'm going to sustain this objection.
And after working under you, what did Harper do, Mr. Francasio?
Yeah, so she basically just quit out of nowhere. This was probably in January 2015. I was devastated because Harper and Casey were like family to me, but I eventually got over it.
And now, Mr. Francasio, I want to bring your attention to August 2016. Now, were you in contact with Harper Martini at this time?
Yeah, so she sent me an email saying, I hope you don't have sour grapes over her leaving. Reading that just made me disgusted. Like, what a horrible wine joke.
Objection, facts not in evidence.
Can you explain that, Ms. St. John?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Francasio is referencing a document that has not yet been entered into evidence, and since he's explaining exactly what he told Harper through this email, I believe that this should be made available to the jury.
Your Honor?
Yes, if you could respond.
Yeah, we're just laying down foundations for entering that exhibit right now. And yeah, so may I actually present that exhibit right now?
Perfect. Yes, you can go ahead and enter this exhibit or attempt to enter this exhibit into evidence. At this point, the objection will be overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. Your Honor, the plaintiff now offers Exhibit 13 for evidence.
Are there any objections, defense counsel?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, with that, Exhibit 13 is admitted.
Now, Mr. Francasio, so what did Harper tell you in that email?
Yeah, so basically she said that she was having problems with pests as far back as 2016. And basically I kind of like was still upset with her at the time, so I just left her on red. Get it? No? Okay. But so, you know, we basically didn't talk for a little bit after that. And eventually I realized the mistakes in that, and I eventually contacted her.
And Your Honor, may I offer another piece of evidence?
Yes, you can screen share. Everyone for the court, you can screen share at your discretion and don't have to ask.
Thank you. And what is this, Mr. Francasio?
Well, that's the response email that I sent to her, basically saying that this was very important and that action needed to be taken on this, or someone could get sick.
The plaintiff now offers Exhibit 14 for evidence.
Any objections?
Yes, Your Honor, I object to hearsay.
What specifically in this document do you believe is hearsay?
The document in its entirety is hearsay because according to America's Best Cookie versus International House of Waffles, a defendant, I apologize, a witness cannot use their own out-of-court statements as well. This document is Mr. Francasio emailing Harper, and his statement should be constructively redacted.
So to be clear, is your objection to the entirety of the document or just to the statements of Mr. Francasio?
Just to Mr. Francasio's statements.
And this, to be clear, is Exhibit 14. Mr. Zam, do you have a response?
Danny's statements does not go to the, sorry, Mr. Francasio's statements do not go towards the truth of the matter in this situation. We're simply showing to demonstrate the subsequent action, which was Harper's response emails in this situation. We're fine with constructively redacting Danny's statements for purpose of this trial.
Okay, well, if plaintiff's counsel is fine with constructively redacting Mr. Francasio's statements, I will sustain your objection in part. I will enter Exhibit 14, specifically just the statements of Ms. Harper Martini. Plaintiff's counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Francazio, what did Harper tell you in that email?
Yeah, basically, same thing. Having problems with pests, except this time it seemed a lot more urgent based on a few things. And so, you know, I honestly didn't want to get involved, but I wasn't just gonna leave her, or I wasn't just gonna like whine about it. So, you know, I responded and gave my advice.
And after this, did Harper ever send you an email saying she followed and implemented your advice?
No, I got no email whatsoever. So who knows if she did or not.
Now, Mr. Francazio, did you know about the wedding of Peony Estates on June the 8th, 2019?
Yeah, actually I did. Harper sent me an email like 1 month leading up to it. Once again, same issue, pests.
And what is this, Mr. Francazio?
Oh, that's the email.
And is it fair and accurate?
Yes, it is.
The plaintiff now offers Exhibit 17 for evidence.
Any objections, Ms. St. John?
Your Honor, I just ask that Mr. Francazio's statements are again constructively redacted.
So are you making another hearsay objection?
Yes.
Mr. Azam, what is your response to the hearsay as to the statements by Mr. Francazio?
Your Honor, with the exception, Your Honor, we're fine with constructively redacting the entirety of Danny Francazio's statements, with the exception from lines 7 to 11, which come under the exclusion of hearsay of Rule 8033, where this is an expression of the plan or statement of intent for Mr. Francazio.
Counsel, I have the document Exhibit 17 in front of me. Could you tell me exactly what those lines are that you're referring to? Because I don't see any line numbers.
Oh. That would be, yes, these lines. More importantly, from more importantly to here, or someone could die.
So that paragraph, is that
Yes.
right? Defense counsel, Ms. St. John, what is your response to specifically 8033 and that last paragraph on that email?
Your Honor, the last paragraph goes to no intent whatsoever. The specific statement that opposing counsel is referring to, someone could die, has nothing to do with Harper or Mr. Francazio's intent in this case.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes, you may.
Your Honor, under Rule 8033, so long as the statement goes towards the declarant's present state of mind, and that includes towards a plan that he may have or that he may want to implement, or he may want someone else to implement, then it does not, then it is excluded from hearsay.
Mr. Azam, I do agree with you in the fact that 8033 does involve a statement of a plan. However, I'm not convinced that it's a plan for somebody else that isn't the declarant to do. At this point, I'm going to have to sustain Ms. St. John's objection, redacting everything from Mr. Francazio and only admitting statements from Ms. Harper Martini.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
And Mr. Francazio, what did Harper Martini say to you in these emails?
Yeah, so basically Harper said that Peony Estates rather failed an FDA inspection, and they had an issue with like pesticide and specifically the bottling area, and they had like pesticide storage really close to it, which I knew was actually a health code violation. The email was basically titled "Help," all caps, and I was amazed because I had emailed Harper before this, giving my advice on what to do about it.
And Mr. Francazio, did Harper Martini mention that her employees found it very, very difficult to actually put the pesticide within the storage facility?
I can't exactly remember, but I don't really think so.
If you just say, yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Francazzi. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Azam. Ms. St. John, do you have a cross-examination of this witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Mr. Francazio, you're the proud owner of Pedro and Rosie, correct?
Yes, I am.
And that's a winery.
It is.
And Harper Martini used to be an employee of yours.
Yeah, she did.
In fact, you taught Harper most of what she knows.
I did teach her everything that she knows.
And you were proud of what she accomplished while working at your winery.
Yeah, under my guidance, she really rose through the ranks, and after I taught her everything, she seemed to know it really well.
So because of this, you promoted her to vineyard manager 2 years later.
I did, actually, yeah.
But then in 2015, Harper betrayed you, didn't she?
Yeah, so she basically out of nowhere quit and started this rival winery. And I mean, I don't really understand what her intent was at the time, but I've forgiven her for it.
And not only did she leave, but she took away half of your senior staff members, didn't she?
She did. Yeah, I was really overswept that growing season.
And you were so mad that when you handed her her final paycheck, you told her you never wanted to see her again.
I think I did say something along those lines, but again, like Harper and Casey were like family to me. So when they emailed me asking, or when she emailed me asking for help, I decided that I couldn't get involved directly, but I did give her my recommendations.
I'm not asking about the email that you sent her, Mr. Francazio. I'm just asking if you told her that you never wanted to see her again.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I was just devastated, but I wasn't gonna whine about it or anything,
So let's talk about what Harper did next. She opened up Peony Estates, right?
Yeah.
And Peony Estates is a winery in Rapid River Valley.
Yes, it is.
That's the same town as Rosie and Pedro, correct?
It is, yeah.
And the opening of Peony Estates really hurt your business, didn't it?
It did, yeah. Before her opening, I had complete control over the whole valley. 2 people in just didn't make the same amount of money.
So by early 2016, your wine sales were down?
They were.
Your visitor numbers were down?
Yeah.
Staff morale was down?
Staff morale was down. No, we were keeping a pretty good group together.
But still, your visitor numbers were down and the staff was disappointed by this, weren't they?
I wouldn't really know. I mean, we seemed to be fine. We were getting along. Obviously, we were making less money, but we've got a good spirit at Rosie and Pedro.
And because you were making less money, you had to take a 25% pay cut, didn't you?
Your Honor, objection. Relevance.
Yeah, Ms. St. John, can you explain to me why the status of Mr. Francazio's business is relevant today?
Yes, Your Honor. This line of questioning goes to the witness's credibility. If I may proffer?
Yes, you may.
The next question that I'm going to ask is going to further reveal that Mr. Francazio is biased against Harper because of how Peony Estates affected his business.
Counselor, I believe that this point, at least at this point, has already been made from your previous questions. I'm going to overrule the objection, but if you could please keep the point going. I think we understand that his business is not doing as well right now.
Yes, Your Honor.
And so objection overruled, but noted. You may proceed.
I'm just going to ask you again, Mr. Francazio. You had to take a 25% pay cut, didn't you?
I did.
Now, let's talk about what Harper did to make her winery safe. She sent you an email on May 13th asking for advice, right?
Yeah.
Because Peony Estates had a drainage issue.
Well, the main issue was pesticides, really, actually.
But in the May 13th email, she was talking about a drainage issue that she was having.
Oh, yeah, she was also talking about a drainage issue too, but there were a few things in the email that she said like they failed in the FDA inspection, and a drainage issue was one of the few things.
So Harper asked you for a recommendation of a product to drain her winery.
Yeah, she did.
So you recommended Jimmy Pick's Royal Flusher.
Yep, it is organic and not as harmful as the.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and sustain this objection without response. Ms. St. John, I believe these are specific statements that you objected to and kept out on direct examination. And for that, I'm going to sustain the objection, and you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Francasio, with the email that you sent Harper, you don't know what she did with that information, correct?
Exactly. I really hope that she did something with it, but I have no way of knowing.
So you don't know if she went out to buy that product.
She tried, actually. I do know that.
You don't know if she got the product, though, do you?
I do know that she did not get the product.
You don't know if she updated any of her safety practices.
You're right. I don't know if she updated her safety practices.
So in fact, you can't speak to anything Harper did at her winery, can you?
Yeah, I mean, I tried everything I could. I emailed her multiple times warning her that this was serious and that someone could die from this. And I don't know if she did it or not, but I really hope she did.
But you can't speak to anything that she did at the winery, right?
Yeah, exactly. I have no idea that she implemented any of my suggestions.
Thank you, Mr. Francasio. No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. St. John. Mr. Azam, do you have any further questions for this witness?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Awesome. At this point, Mr. Francasio, you are excused. Are there any further witnesses from plaintiff's counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Dr. Jameen Kwan to the stand.
Dr. Kwan, if you could please come to the stand. And is it Frank or Frankie?
Frankie.
Frankie. Miss Frankie, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. Please state your name for the jury.
Hi, my name is Jameen Kwan.
What do you do for a living, Dr. Kwan?
I'm an emergency room physician.
Now, we'll return to that later. First, where did you go to school?
Well, I received my Bachelor of Science in Biology from the Georgia Institute of Technology in 1993, then received my MD from the University of North Carolina School of Medicine in 1997. I later completed a fellowship at Emory University Hospital, Atlanta, while specializing in toxicology and emergency medicine.
Describe your experience with emergency medicine.
I worked at Midland St. Joseph Hospital as an emergency room physician, Sacred Heart of Midlands Hospital as the senior emergency room physician, and now I work at River Valley Hospital as the chief emergency room physician.
Have you ever been published?
Yes, I have. I've published work on both toxicology and emergency medicine.
What happens when someone walks into an emergency room?
The first thing that happens is my colleagues and I complete triage on the patient.
Explain triage.
Simply put, triage is the assignment of the order of patient treatment depending on the urgency of their illness or wounds.
What happens after you complete triage?
We determine if there is an obvious cause of harm in order to form a preliminary diagnosis.
What if the harm isn't obvious?
At that point, I would consult with other doctors, order lab tests, and continue observation to further update the preliminary diagnosis.
Does a diagnosis ever change?
Yes, it can, and it often does. The fast-paced environment of the emergency room requires me to adapt very quickly to changing conditions.
What do you do after you've made a diagnosis?
We then begin an appropriate treatment of the patient.
And is this process of triage, diagnosis, and treatment standard practicing procedure?
Yes, it is used in every emergency room throughout the country.
And do you use this method reliably?
Yes, I do, every time I'm working.
And were you working on the night of June 7th, 2019?
Yes, I was.
And did you treat Mr. Genesis Petrillo that night?
Yes, I first encountered Mr. Petrillo when he was brought into the hospital by the EMTs.
What happened next?
When Mr. Petrillo entered the emergency room, he was vomiting profusely, and the friend that brought him in, I believe it was Angel Rodriguez, informed me that he had been vomiting since earlier that night.
What else did you learn?
I spoke with Mr. Petrillo and learned that he had some stomach cramps and some pain or tightness in his chest.
What did these symptoms lead you to believe?
Due to his condition that I initially observed, I originally believed that he could have been suffering from alcohol poisoning. However, after further observation, I noticed 3 additional symptoms that concerned me.
Why did they concern you?
Well, these 3 additional symptoms were inconsistent with alcohol poisoning.
Explain the first one.
Mr. Petrillo's pupils were severely contracted. When I shined a light into his eyes, he began tearing excessively, which is not a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
Describe the second.
Mr. Petrillo exhibited involuntary muscle twitching and incontinence, which is involuntary urination or defecation, which is not a symptom of alcohol overdose either.
And explain the third symptom that isn't a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
Lastly, while alcohol poisoning typically produces a weak but rapid heart rate, Mr. Petrillo's pulse was slowed.
And what did these additional symptoms lead you to believe?
These indicated to me that Mr. Petrillo was suffering from something more than alcohol poisoning, and I believe that he ingested organophosphate poisons.
Are organophosphate poisons deadly?
Yes, ingestion can be very deadly to humans.
And how are these widely tested for?
Typically, a doctor can use low acetylcholinesterase levels to determine if an individual has been exposed to organophosphate pesticides.
What led you to believe that Mr. Petrillo had ingested organophosphate poison?
Organophosphate poisons are the only commonly used pesticide ambivalents that cause the pupils to contract, which is one of the symptoms I observed in Mr. Petrillo.
What did you do next, Dr. Kwan?
I began treatment immediately because if I was correct, Mr. Petrillo's symptoms had advanced to the point to where he was near death.
What did you do?
I began administering an antidote immediately. However, a few minutes after I began administering the antidote, Mr. Petrillo had a coughing fit, a seizure, and he fell into a coma.
Did he ever wake up?
No, he did not. And despite our best efforts to revive him, he passed away in the morning.
Did anything else help with your conclusion that Mr. Petrillo had been poisoned by organophosphates?
The 2 lab tests that I ordered during treatment came back after his death.
And what did those lab tests indicate?
They indicated that Mr. Petrillo's blood tested positive for organophosphate poisons and that his stomach contents contained both wine and organophosphate pesticides.
So, considering these lab results, what did you conclude was Mr. Petrillo's cause of death?
Mr. Petrillo most likely ingested wine contaminated with organophosphate pesticides on the evening of June 7, 2019. His reported symptoms perfectly matched the progression of an expected pesticide poisoning case, and this is what ultimately caused the death of Mr. Genesis Petrillo.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Frankie. Ms. Kimmel, do you have a cross-examination for Dr. Kwan?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Dr. Kwan, you hope that this case will help convince legislators to either strongly curtail or outright ban the use of chemical pesticides, correct?
I believe that it is legislators' duty to protect citizens, and if they were banned, it would have prevented a tragedy such as this, yes, and I do adamantly advocate for that.
When Genesis was brought into the hospital, he was suffering from symptoms consistent with alcohol poisoning.
Originally, some symptoms were consistent. However, there were those 3 additional ones that could not have resulted from alcohol poisoning.
Right, so you ordered a poisons and toxins analysis and regular toxicology report.
Yes, I did, because I was under the belief that he could have been suffering from organophosphate pesticide poisoning, yes.
Right, but before you got those test results back, you assumed it was organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
I did not assume. I used my advanced knowledge and my knowledge of toxicology and also pesticide exposure, and I was pretty certain that that was what he was suffering from.
And before you got those test results back, you administered an organophosphate antidote.
Yes, it is proper procedure to begin administering the antidote if an individual is suffering from something so dire as a pesticide poisoning case.
It didn't work, and Genesis died of respiratory failure shortly after.
Respiratory failure is typically the way in which people die when they are exposed to organophosphate pesticides. And as Mr. Petrillo had ingested this most likely earlier in the night, it had been in his system for a while, and then his symptoms had advanced to the point to where they were very severe and caused his death.
When you got Genesis test results back, you found that his blood alcohol content was 0.16%.
Yes, it was. However, that could not lead to the death of an individual. An individual's BAC would have to be, I believe, at least over 0.3% in order to cause severe symptoms and death.
And you knew that pesticides can interact negatively with alcohol, making the pesticide symptoms more severe and exaggerated.
Yes, they can interact and make it more severe. However, they are very distinct from one another, as the 3 additional symptoms were not consistent with alcohol poisoning.
Thank you.
Perfect. Ms. Kimmel, is that your last question?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Frankie, do you have any redirect for this witness?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that my witness be allowed to step down virtually from the stand.
Yes, Dr. Kwan, you are excused. Does plaintiff's counsel have anything further today?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff's counsel rests its case in chief and asks for a brief recess.
Defense counsel, would a 5-minute recess work with y'all?
Yes, Your Honor.
And then lastly, just to confirm, timekeepers, do we have time to take a 5-minute recess?
Yes, looks like it, Your Honor.
Perfect. Well, we will reconvene at 11:28 and then begin defense case in chief.
Yes, Your Honor.
Are both counsels back?
Plaintiff is back, Your Honor.
Defense is ready, Your Honor.
Perfect. Defense counsel, would you like to call your first witness?
Yes, the defense calls Austin Lewis to the stand.
Miss Lewis, if you could please take the stand. And Miss St. John, you may proceed when you're ready.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hi, I'm Austin Lewis.
What do you do for a living, Miss Lewis?
I'm the chief winemaker at Peony Estates.
How did you get into winemaking?
I was basically raised in the winery, okay? My mom was a winemaker for Cumberland's Farm Winery, later called Rosie and Pedro, and my dad was a sommelier from Texas, so it was kind of a match made in the vineyard. So it's been in my life, it's been a part of my life since I was born.
And why are you here today?
Well, I work at Peony Estates and I help manage our safety precautions.
How did you come to work for Peony Estates?
Well, in January 2015, Harper Martini, we used to work together at Rosie and Pedro. She recruited me and told me that she was starting her own winery. And I knew she was super good at her job, so I was super excited to get on board with her.
What do you do at Peony Estates?
Well, aside from being the chief winemaker, I also oversee all of our cleaning and pesticide procedures. It's my job to make sure that the winery is spick and spam, which my father taught me to do very well. It's difficult, though, because we do have a little bit of a bug problem.
How do you manage that bug problem?
Well, we used to use all organic products, which I was a big fan of, but unfortunately, it really wasn't working. So we prioritized the safety and actually managing that problem and switched to chemical pesticides in about the fall of 2015.
Ms. Lewis, do you train all of your employees on safe pesticide usage?
Oh, absolutely. I've had a mandatory annual training for all employees since October of 2015. They're also required to wash their hands thoroughly after every use of pesticides and change into a fresh set of clothes. What I will say, though, is all of my employees were very prepared for Corona with all of my hand washing policies.
Have you had any issues with employees not following your rules?
There have been a couple here and there, but I always make sure that I address them.
How do you address these issues?
Well, I do have signs all over the winery with reminders. I don't even think you can open a door without being told to wash your hands again.
Let's talk about the setup of your winery. Tell me about the landscape.
So it's in a swamp and it's really pretty. Not as pretty as the Everglades that I went on vacation with my fiance last summer, but it's still really pretty. There's a really nice wide slope, not super tall. We grow our grapes there. That's where most of our vines are. And again, as I said, we do have a bit of a bug problem because we are in a swamp.
So you mentioned that you have a slope. Is this slope ever a problem for you?
A little bit. It's honestly very gorgeous, but we do have drainage issues with it. See, when we have to spray the pesticides, it all runs down the slope and kind of collects at the bottom. So all of the grapes there, we have to deal with them in that way.
Does that affect your safety procedures?
It does, but I've implemented a rigorous process for dealing with it, and I make sure that all of my employees follow my rules here. It does affect our yield every year and the amount of wine that we can produce and sell, but it is necessary to make sure our wine is safe.
How do you determine which grapes are good and which grapes are bad?
Well, every year I basically go down to the bottom of the slope and I rope off about 20% of those grapes where the drainage and the runoff is at its absolute worst. And I inspect all of those grapes very carefully.
So what do you do with those bad grapes after you inspect them?
I simply toss them. They're never included in our wine production for the year. It does work out though, because the grapes at the bottom, which are the bad ones that I do throw out, are less flavorful. So we can use more of the ones at the top.
Did you throw out the grapes from the 2018 yield, Ms. Lewis?
To my knowledge, yes. I was out of town dealing with a little bit of a family emergency that year, but I did make sure that Harper knew my instructions and that all the employees knew the instructions and which grapes they were to throw out.
Let's move on to how you store your pesticides. What are the guidelines regarding pesticide storage?
The storage shed needs to be 600 feet away from any production facilities.
Do your storage facilities live up to these standards?
They do. In 2018, we built a new shed that was exactly 600 feet away, so it meets the standard.
What are the purpose of these guidelines?
It's really important to protect from contamination. Having the shed 600 feet away helps protect the production areas from any spills or leakages.
As far as you know, has Peony Estates ever had a spill or a leakage?
Not to my knowledge, no. I oversee every single pesticide spraying that we've done, and I've never seen an issue myself, and I've never had that reported to me. So that's never been an issue for us.
How would you describe the overall safety of Peony Estates?
We work really hard to ensure safety. We always put our wine and our community and our customers first. They're like our family.
Miss Lewis, we've heard a lot today about the Cara bottle of wine. Where was that bottle found?
To my knowledge, it was found in the dumpster, the same one that we used to throw away all of our pesticides.
Is it possible that those empty pesticide containers are what contaminated the bottle?
Your Honor, objection, speculation.
Ms. St. John, can you respond to that, please?
Yes, Your Honor. Austin Lewis handled pesticides as part of her daily operations at Peony Estates. He can testify to whether or not those empty pesticide containers would have gotten into the Cara bottle of wine.
Ms. Pike, do you have a response to that?
Yes, Your Honor. There is no way for Austin Lewis to say whether or not the empty pesticides container in the trash can could have contaminated the Cara wine bottle. They have no basis of knowledge for this fact or this speculation.
If I may respond on those grounds, Your Honor.
You may.
Austin Lewis doesn't need to say whether or not this is actually what happened. Just based on her experiences at the winery, I'm asking her whether or not this is possible.
At this point, I'm inclined to agree with Ms. Pike and sustain the objection. I do believe Ms. Lewis can testify as to whether or not there were pesticides in this dumpster, but I do not believe she can testify as to whether or not that was a reason they were contaminated. I think that is a matter for the jury to decide.
Your Honor. So, Ms. Lewis, what was in the dumpster with the open bottle of Cara wine?
That's the same dumpster that we used to throw away all of our pesticides.
Thank you. No further questions.
Ms. Pike, would you like to cross-examine this witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may. Yes, you may.
Now, you've been in the wine business since 2012, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
And you used to work at Danny Francasio's winery, isn't that right?
That's true.
Until you switched to working at Harper Martini's winery in 2015?
Yes, I was so excited when Harper told me that she was starting her own winery. So I was really happy that she provided me with that opportunity.
And Miss Martini offered you a job as the head winemaker there, isn't that correct?
Yes, I was so happy. I felt like my skills were being acknowledged and I was able to finally really do what I was good at.
And she also offered you a 10% stake in the winery, did she not?
Yes, she did.
Your
Honor. What is your objection, Ms. St. John?
I'm objecting to the fact that opposing counsel is asking Austin Lewis about her pay raise once she started working at Peony Estates. This is not relevant to her testimony at all today.
Ms. Pike, why is Ms. Lewis's pay raise relevant for us today?
Your Honor, I'm building a foundation for bias of Mrs. Lewis based on the fact that if Peony Estates were to lose this case, she would lose not only her job, but her 10% stake in the winery. And so I'm attacking her credibility and building up a foundation for this bias.
So, Ms. Pike, to be clear, it's not important that it was a pay raise, rather just that she had a 10% stake in the company?
For the foundation of this bias, I think both the pay raise when switching from Brancasio's winery to Martini's winery is important, as well as the 10% stake.
Counselor, I'm inclined to agree that the 10% stake is important. I'm not entirely convinced that the pay raise is, so I will sustain the irrelevance objection in part.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Miss Lewis, you had a lot of debt, didn't you?
Yeah, I did a little bit earlier in my life.
So this 10% stake in Peony Estates was helpful for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Now, I'd like to move on to talk about Peony Estates and the pesticides. Peony Estates is next to a swamp, isn't that right?
Yes, it was really pretty to take pictures of, but again, the drainage issue is a little difficult, but we always made sure to keep those under wraps.
There's a lot of pests in the swamp, isn't there?
Yes, naturally.
And you had issues with pests in the winery.
We did, but again, we always made sure to address them.
And at first you tried to use organic pesticides, didn't you?
Yes, I mean, trust me, I'm a big fan of always using natural organic products, but when I see something that isn't working and it's, coming into contact and, threatening our safety, I was willing to make the change.
So you had to use chemical pesticides, isn't that right?
Correct.
And the brand that you use is Bug Off, isn't that correct?
Yep.
This is the only brand of pesticides you use?
Yes.
Now, you know how dangerous pesticides are, don't you?
Yes, that's why I make sure to train my employees and I oversee all of our spraying, so yes.
And your coworker Kirby almost died from drinking just a little bit of pesticide.
Yes, I remember that. That was pretty scary, but luckily Kirby ended up being okay and everything was addressed.
You were worried about the winery's pesticide use, weren't you?
At that point, I was a little bit worried. Yeah.
So you decided to talk to Harper Martini about it.
I did.
He was annoyed that you talked to her about this?
A little bit. She was kind of all in the wraps with all the business side of things. And, it's my job to make sure the pesticides are in check. So.
Objection.
What is your objection, Ms. St. John?
Sorry, I'm not sure if you could hear me earlier. This question calls for speculation.
Speculation. Ms. St. John, can you explain to me what part of Ms. Lewis's answer was speculative?
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel is asking Austin Lewis whether or not Harper Martini was annoyed by Austin Lewis's statements, and Austin Lewis has no idea what Harper was feeling and whether or not she was annoyed.
Ms. Pike, what is your response to that?
Your Honor, I think it's very clear that Austin Lewis, someone who, as you talked about in your direct, has worked with Harper Martini for a while, would be able to tell whether or not Harper Martini was in fact annoyed.
Can I respond on those grounds?
You may.
I would ask then that opposing counsel lay the foundation that Austin Lewis saw that Harper Martini was annoyed, whether by some facial expression she made or something she could physically observe.
I'm inclined to agree with defense counsel. I do believe that unless, Ms. Pike, you can lay some sort of foundation that would exemplify to us, at least, that Ms. Martini was annoyed. If not, I'm going to sustain the objection, and if you could please move forward.
May I please re-ask my question, Your Honor? In a different manner.
Yes, of course.
Now, Mrs. Lewis, did Harper Martini appear to be annoyed?
Harper's a little hard to read sometimes. She was talking kind of quickly, but that was pretty much it.
Okay, and Harper Martini said that a little bit of pesticides aren't a big deal.
Yeah, I remember that.
Said that no one ever dies from it.
Yeah.
And she forbade you from retraining your employees.
She did, she didn't want me to do additional to what I'd already done. We already have those annual mandatory trainings every single year. I already have all of the signs up. So it was just, she didn't want me to continue.
But just to be clear, Harper Martini forbade you from retraining your employees. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And so all you could do was put up signs around the winery?
Yes, I actually had a lot of fun making them. I did a little bit of graphic design in high school. So make sure everyone knew how long to wash their hands for, making sure they had clean clothes ready to go in their lockers, and they're all over the place. You literally can't open a door without seeing one of those signs.
Now, Ms. Lewis, moving on, you still have that 10% stake at Peony Estates, don't you?
I do, yes.
Question asked and answered, Your Honor.
I'm going to go ahead and overrule it. I think her question before was that she got a 10% stake, and this next question asked if she still has that 10% stake as of today.
Yes,
Ms. Pike, you may proceed.
And so if Peony Estates were to lose this case, you would lose that 10% stake?
Yeah, that's naturally true. I would lose a little bit of my own money. Yeah.
And you would lose your job as head winemaker?
Yes, that's true. But I really trust my skills, and I'm pretty sure I could find it another place. But I'm, again, not too worried.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Pike. Ms. St. John, do you have a redirect examination for this witness?
No, Your Honor. I just asked that my witness be excused.
At this point, Ms. Lewis, you are excused.
Thank you.
Does defense counsel have any further witnesses they'd like to bring forward?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Sam Arnold to the stand.
Mr. Arnold, I believe. Miss Arnold, if you could please take the stand. Miss Arnold. Miss Kimmel, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you. Is she on there? Mr. Arnold, what do you do for a living? Or could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Of course. My name is Sam Arnold.
And what do you do for a living, Miss Arnold?
I own my own food service business, Sam Arnold Catering, and I was voted the most prestigious food service provider in the tri-state area.
How did you get into that?
Well, I always wanted to be a celebrity chef. So after high school, I attended Le Cordon Bleu in Paris. I worked in some of the very top kitchens in France and gained quite a lot of experience and learned a lot about how to properly and safely cater food.
Who do you provide your services for?
All kinds of events, mostly weddings, funerals, corporate events, those kinds of things. I do my best to form good relationships with my clients so that they can become regulars. That's really how you become successful.
All right, we talked about your background. Now I'd like to talk to you about your work at Peony Estates. Is Peony Estates one of your regulars?
Yes, I worked with them multiple times.
And when was your most recent time catering there?
That was June 8th, 2019, and that will be the last time.
Why was it the last?
Well, initially there was some difficulty in deciding what the menu was going to be. It was all very hectic. But really what kicked it over the edge was that it's no longer good for my reputation to be working with Peony Estates since the events that happened on the 7th.
Now I want to talk to you about your catering process. What steps do you normally go through when serving a client?
So I have 4 distinct steps. First, I talk to the client to determine what menu they want, what their vision is for the event. Then, as the executive chef, I cook the meal with my staff at our kitchen. And then on the day of the event, I deliver the meal to the client and prepare it, do the final arrangements of the meal there at their kitchen. And then my staff and I then serve the meal to the guest.
Did anything mess up this process at Peony Estates?
Well, the first step, talking to the client, that wasn't particularly smooth. We had some difficulties in actually deciding what they wanted the meal to be, but everything else was perfectly smooth.
When you're catering, what does the location need to have to fulfill your needs?
Well, I assemble my food in the kitchen the day of, so the location must be clean. Obviously, they need to follow the health and safety regulations, and ideally, it would also be organized so I could find what I need. Although I cook the food before I arrive, in order to ensure that the presentation is pristine, because I mean, that's half of tasting the food is looking at it, I need to assemble the food the day of at the site.
And what time did you deliver the food to Peony Estates on the night of the rehearsal dinner?
It was around 11, right after their brunch. I brought the food to be kept in the kitchen before we brought it out to the catering tables.
And what was the state of the kitchen when you got there?
It was a bit chaotic and disorganized because Peony Estates staff was cleaning up from brunch. They were doing dishes and such, working to get the kitchen ready for the rehearsal dinner.
Are you familiar with the health codes that Peony Estates has to abide by?
Of course, as a responsible caterer, I must be. They're the same rules that all of us have to follow.
Can you describe the kitchen's overall level of cleanliness?
Well, I've been working with Peony Estates since 2016, and it's always been incredibly clean every time I went there. If a little bit disorganized, there was one time when I needed sugar and accidentally found flour. Issues like that sometimes weren't super smooth, but everything was always clean. Just Harper had a different organizational system than I did.
And when you arrived at the kitchen in June 2019, was there any trash in the kitchen?
No, of course not. Just dirty plates and silverware from the aftermath of lunch.
What would you do if you went to a kitchen where you were catering and it wasn't clean?
I would not and I could not serve there. As I said, I'm the most prestigious food service provider in the area. I don't settle for subpar conditions.
Now, we've heard a lot about pesticides today. Have you seen any pesticides at Peony Estates?
Yes, back in 2018, I saw some pesticides. They almost got brought back into the kitchen. I immediately said no, they should not be in the kitchen, and then they were immediately removed.
Did you see any containers of pesticides in the kitchen the last time you served at Peony Estates?
I saw a small container in the corner far from where I was keeping the food.
And did you see any leaking of pesticides onto the food prep area or the counters?
Absolutely not. I would have packed up and left immediately if that were the case.
Did you see any bugs in the kitchen?
Absolutely not. The whole time I was at Peony Estates, I saw no bugs.
Throughout the process, did you and your staff wear gloves?
Of course. As did all of my employees, all of us wore gloves throughout the whole process. As I said, I hold the highest standards for my business.
Did you have everything you needed to provide your service?
Yes, I did.
Did it concern you when you saw the pesticides?
No, it was nowhere near the food, and it's pretty standard to have that form of pesticide somewhere near the kitchen so that you can handle bugs in a more immediate, an immediate basis when they arrive.
And was the container open?
No, it did not look open. If it looked open to me, I would not have kept my food there.
Because you saw the container of pesticides, did you stop your service?
No, of course not. It wasn't a violation of any code that we have to follow, so I wasn't concerned.
Did you go anywhere in Peony Estates other than the reception hall and the kitchen?
Of course I did. I had to go to the wine cellar to find the wine that was going to be paired with dinner, and so I walked that path quite a few times.
And when you went to the wine cellar, did you see any pesticides there?
Well, I did not see any pesticides while I was there, to my knowledge. And again, open pesticides anywhere would have been a massive red flag. I absolutely would not have continued catering if I had seen pesticides anywhere near anything that a potential client could ingest.
Did you see any health code violations in the wine cellar?
No, I saw no violations.
Are you aware of anyone that got sick after eating your food?
Regrettably, I did hear that Genesis Portillo got sick after eating my food, but he was the only one that I heard of who got sick.
Do you have any idea how that could have happened?
Truly, I have no idea. We hold the highest standards of cleanliness, and I had no reason to believe that Peony Estates did not as well. I can only tell you what I saw during the food service, but I didn't see any health code violations on that date.
Thank you, Ms. Arnold. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kimmel. Mr. Azam, do you have any cross-examination for us today?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
You may proceed when you're ready.
Hello, Miss Arnold.
Hi, how are you?
Your first restaurant, the Breakfast Salad Cafe, closed only after 6 months, right?
Yes, turns out people don't like eating eggs on their salads. It wasn't a big hit.
And to make ends meet, you started a food service business, is that correct?
Yes, when times get tough, the tough get tougher. I adapted and realized I was best off being my own boss and best off working kind of more on the road, so I don't need to be kept to any particular location. I get to meet the clients where they're at instead of asking them to come to me.
Eventually, you met Harper Martini, the owner of Peony Estates, in 2016 when she chose you to cater for their anniversary party, right?
Yes, it was a great start to a wonderful relationship, but now it's ended.
You would even say that you went from being inches away from bankruptcy to one of the premier catering companies in the state of Midlands nearly overnight, right?
Yes, times were tough, but I was working hard to be able to make a name for my business. Harper did help me with that at the beginning. Now I've established that name and very independent.
But even after business turned around, Peony Estates remained one of your largest clients, correct?
Yes, they're a very popular venue here in Midlands, so they often need catering. So it's been a great stream of business for me.
And Miss Arnold, do you believe that it is very important for you to stay in Harper Martini's good graces, because otherwise your business will suffer?
Yes, I want to remain cordial with her. I've cut off all business relationships with her. I'm done doing business at Peony Estates. Obviously, I would prefer not to make anyone mad, but I'm done doing business at Peony Estates.
And is it true that when another competitive winery entered into the Rapid Midlands area, Harper Martini, through her own actions, actually managed to shut that winery down?
I'm not sure exactly why the winery got shut down. I don't know their business records at all. So I can't be positive about why the winery shut down.
Now, before being contacted by Martini to plan for the wedding, you accidentally received an email in June 2018 from Austin Lewis, the wine manager of Peony Estates, correct?
Yes.
And is that this email?
I believe so, yes.
Is it fair and accurate?
It appears to be.
Plaintiff now offers Exhibit 12 for evidence.
Any objections from Ms. Kimmel?
No, Your Honor.
At this point, Exhibit 12 is so admitted.
And that memo stated that there have been pest infestations within the winery, correct?
I'm sorry, it's been a while since I've looked at this. It wasn't really meant for me, so I didn't read it thoroughly, but if you'd like me to read it now, I can try to tell you what it says. Is that what you'd like me to do?
Can you repeat that, please?
Yes. Your question was, did they use chemical pesticides?
Yes.
Yes, that's what the first line of this email says.
And they were using these pesticides within the bottling area, correct?
Yes, that's what the email says. I'm just reading.
And from the second paragraph, you can see that they had to use pests. The only thing that mattered was that it was done quickly and cheaply.
Yes, I believe that there was the first priority to get rid of any pests. Obviously, that's very important in a winery, or really in anywhere where you're serving food. To have any kind of pests would be a problem. So obviously, it is important that they take care of that matter quickly and efficiently.
Now, when you returned to Peony Estates on February the 8th, 2019, right?
I did go there then, yes.
And you were surprised to find the kitchen well organized, correct?
Yes, like I said, Harper and I had different organizational tactics. She didn't always like to label the food in her kitchen. All the food was labeled on that day, so I was a little surprised to see things more organized.
And Harper Martini, the owner of Peony Estates, explained that it was actually clean for once because they were expecting an FDA inspection that day, right?
Yeah, she was being a little hyperbolic.
She actually even told you that Peony Estates always got a heads up for any surprise inspection because Austin Lewis, the wine manager of Peony Estates, had a contact with the FDA, right?
Yeah, Harper liked to boast about her connections. She was very proud of being well connected. She tended to blow these kind of things out of proportion. I didn't put much stake into it. I figured she was just trying to impress me with her connections, so I wasn't really too concerned about what she was saying.
And on the day of the rehearsal dinner, right, you found Harper Martini to be working with several bottles of wine within the kitchen, correct?
Yes, I saw that on top of the wine that we are going to be serving the guests during the meal. She was also gifting wine for guests to take home afterwards or to drink there, assumably if they wanted to drink it there as well. And so she was handling some of that wine in the kitchen.
And when there, she informed you that the entire cask of Cara wine had been housed in the wine's bottling area for the past few months, right?
Yes, that's where they keep the wine, is in the wine bottling area. So the wine was being kept where it was supposed to be.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Azam. Ms. Kimmel, do you have a redirect examination for this witness?
No, Your Honor. I just asked that my witness be able to step down.
Yes, Ms. Arnold, you are excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And defense counsel, do you have any further witnesses for us?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we call Dr. Riley Cannon to the stand.
Dr. Cannon, if you could please take the stand. And Ms. Fitzsimmons, you can begin when you're ready.
I'm sorry,
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
I am Dr.
What do you do for a living, Dr. Cannon?
I am an associate consultant for Gardner Consulting Incorporated based in Beverly Hills, California, but I specialize in both toxicology and pharmacology.
Tell us a little bit about your educational background.
I received my bachelor's degree in chemistry from The Ohio State University with honors in 1990. I then got my MD with an emphasis in toxicology from Harvard Medical School, summa cum laude in 1996.
What other professional experience do you have?
After receiving my MD, I worked at the Massachusetts General Hospital for 9 years. I was also the director of toxicology for three of those years. I then moved to Midlands in 2005 and worked as a professor of toxicology from 2005 to 2014. I then started working for Gardner Consulting, where I testify as an expert on issues of medicine, pharmacology, and toxicology.
How are you involved in today's case?
I was hired by the defense to create my own independent report regarding the death of Genesis Petrillo.
How did you go about making this report?
Whenever I or anyone at my firm take on a new consulting project, we always use something called the medical comprehensive assessment.
What's the medical comprehensive assessment?
The goal is to assess a patient's case completely and go through all the possible conclusions. Applying this to Genesis's case, I looked at all the events Dr. Kwan reported on the night of Genesis's death. I looked at Genesis's medical history. I used exhibits and statements provided to me in order to synthesize all the information, using my own expertise to understand all the possible causes of death that I found.
Is this method standard in your field?
Absolutely.
And is it reliable?
The most reliable method in the field.
Did you reliably apply this method to the facts and data in today's case?
Yes, I reviewed Dr. Kwan's full report, the toxicology reports ordered by Dr. Kwan, the analysis from the wine sample conducted on June 10th, Angel Rodriguez's affidavit, and Genesis's medical records.
Was all of that data sufficient to come to a conclusion in today's case?
Yes.
Okay, I want to talk now about the conclusions you came to in your report. What did you ultimately find?
Objection, Your Honor, to 702C that this method is not reliable, if I may be heard.
You may.
Although opposing counsel has stated that this method is reliable, a judge should consider many more relevant factors, such as if this has been peer-reviewed, if it has been tested, if it has a known error rate, or if it has been published. While the list established in Tarrant Readers versus Merle Dow, which can be found on page 3 of your case law packet, while this list isn't dispositive, all of these factors should be relevant in your determining if this method is reliable.
Your Honor, if I may be heard on those grounds.
You may.
As opposing counsel stated, these list of factors are not dispositive. Dr. Cannon has tested that this method is reliable and that it is used as a standard in his field. It has therefore gained wide acceptance within the field, meeting one of the factors on the list. This method is reliable, and Dr. Cannon has testified to that fact.
Your Honor, if I may.
You may.
We did not hear during this, we simply heard that this method was reliable. That does not meet any of the relevant factors detailed in Tarrant Reader versus Merle Dow. And Tarrant Reader versus Merle Dow is there. So we have a plethora of factors to consider when determining if a method is relevant. And because they have met none of these, this method is not reliable under 702C.
Ms. Fitzsimmons, if you could do me a favor and lay just a little bit more foundation about this medical comparative assessment, or the MCA, and at that point, I think enough foundation will have been laid. So
Yes,
sustaining the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Dr. Cannon, is the medical comprehensive assessment widely accepted within the field?
Yes, it is widely accepted. There have been a number of studies that have been conducted using this analysis. I don't know if you want me to go through them, but there are a number of studies that have established this as being well used in the field, and everybody that is a consultant uses this method.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Cannon. I want to talk now about the conclusions that you came to in this report. What did you ultimately find?
The conclusion Dr. Kwan came to concerning Genesis's cause of death is possible. However, there are a number of possibilities Dr. Kwan did not consider, and therefore his conclusion is possible, but not more likely than not. Namely, I found 4 other possibilities that Dr. Kwan did not even consider and thus did not rule out.
What were those four possibilities?
The four possibilities are that Genesis suffered from alcohol poisoning, an allergic reaction, hepatic or liver disease, or that the pesticide entered his system in a different way other than the wine. However, the most compelling possibility is that Genesis suffered from alcohol poisoning, which ultimately led to respiratory arrest.
Dr. Cannon, I want to talk about that in more detail. What makes you think that alcohol poisoning may have contributed to Genesis's death?
In Dr. Kwan's report, he notes that Genesis exhibited several of the telltale signs of alcohol poisoning, including nausea, vomiting, stomach pain, slow breathing, amongst other things.
Dr. Cannon, we've heard from Dr. Kwan on the stand today that he ruled out alcohol poisoning. Why did he do that?
Dr. Kwan's conclusion was based primarily on Genesis's blood alcohol content when he arrived at the hospital, in that his BAC was too low for him to be suffering severe alcohol poisoning. However, I don't think that this is necessarily true.
Why don't you believe it's necessarily true?
Well, when Genesis arrived at the hospital, his BAC was tested at 0.16. It is true, and I agree this is likely too low to lead to alcohol poisoning, but there are a number of factors that we simply don't know that could possibly have led to Genesis's BAC being higher earlier in the night.
What could have led to someone's BAC being higher at one point in the evening and lower at another point?
Well, BAC does not remain constant. It begins to spike immediately after the consumption of alcohol and typically peaks between 30 minutes to an hour after that.
So what does this mean in Genesis's case?
Well, it isn't exactly clear when Genesis stops drinking, nor do we know how much he drank and the percentage of alcohol in each drink. Therefore, it's impossible to determine what Genesis's peak BAC was, but it was undoubtedly higher than when he got tested at the hospital.
If Genesis had a BAC of higher than the 0.16 that the hospital found when they tested him later that evening, what might have been his symptoms?
The symptoms that Dr. Kwan initially observed would still hold true. However, if his BAC was higher and nearing a severe level, which it most likely was, then he would have most likely suffered from respiratory arrest, which is what ultimately killed him.
Dr. Cannon, taking all of these things into account, what were you able to ultimately conclude about Genesis Petrillo's case?
I completely acknowledge that some of these suggestions are a little bit unlikely, but it is important to note that these are still possibilities and possibilities that were not thoroughly and vigorously considered. Therefore, we are left with too many unanswered questions to be able to say what happened with scientific certainty.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Fitzsimmons. Ms. Frankie, do you have a cross-examination of this witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
And
May
you
I
may
proceed?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Cannon, the cause of death that you considered most likely was alcohol poisoning, correct?
That was the most likely, but also the other three, yes.
However, the alcohol poisoning, which you considered the most likely, you said was extremely unlikely.
No, I did not say extremely unlikely. I said that some of them might be more unlikely than the others. However, the most likely one was alcohol poisoning.
Is it your testimony today that alcohol poisoning was not extremely unlikely?
Well, I said that it is likely. It was definitely a contributing factor, as were the other three. So yes, it definitely was a contributing factor. It was likely.
Dr. Gannon, my question was, is it your testimony today that alcohol poisoning was not extremely unlikely? And that is your testimony today, isn't it?
Again, it was likely.
Dr. Cannon, you would remember a report you reviewed?
Yes.
Well, it said it was unlikely. However, alcohol poisoning does not explain the pesticides, correct?
Counsel? Yes.
Hearsay as to the statements within the affidavit, opposing counsel just elicited a statement from the affidavit or from the report and said that it said it was unlikely. She's not entered this document and she cannot, as it is hearsay. So therefore, I would like to strike that part of her questioning.
I'll rephrase the question, Your Honor.
Okay, we will strike the question, allow Ms. Frankie to rephrase the question. Objection sustained.
Dr. Cannon, alcohol poisoning does not explain the pesticides in Mr. Petrio's system, correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Alcohol poisoning does not explain the pesticides found in Mr. Petrio's system,
Oh, that's true.
and neither does any other theory that you considered.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Sorry.
No theory that you considered explains why alcohol poisoning was found in Mr. Petrio's system.
Well, no, my explanations do not explain how the poison got into the system. Mine was simply an analysis of Dr. Kwan's report and the other potential causes of death that could have happened to Genesis.
That's a yes to my question.
Yes.
However, organophosphate poisoning does account for pesticides, correct?
Organophosphate is a pesticide, yes.
So that would explain the pesticides, correct?
Yes. Again, I explained the causes of death, not how it got into her system.
And death by organophosphate poisoning is the most likely cause of death in this case, correct?
It is likely, but the alcohol poisoning was a substantial factor, and alcohol poisoning can lead to the respiratory arrest, which is what ultimately killed Genesis, and therefore it definitely was a contributing factor, a significant one.
However, alcohol poisoning does not explain the pesticides. Only organophosphate poisoning as a cause of death explains those pesticides, correct?
That's right. The pesticide, I cannot explain where the pesticide came from or how it got into our system. That's correct.
Well, you think that the wine Mr. Petrio drank was the most likely way he ingested those pesticides.
Again, it is likely, yes.
The most likely.
Yes, it's likely. Yes, it is most likely.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Frankie. Ms. Fitzsimmons, do you have any redirect examinations for this witness?
Yes, Your Honor, I do.
Perfect. You may proceed.
Dr. Cannon, we've had a lot of most likelies thrown around in today's testimony. Can you explain what you mean when you say that a certain cause of death is most likely?
Well, yes, when I use most likely, it is based off of the evidence that I used in my report, and a number of that evidence was used from Dr. Kwan and the reports that Dr. Kwan used. And therefore, if you were just looking at what Dr. Kwan used in his report, it is likely, however, Dr. Kwan did not take into consideration the other causes of death that I include in my report.
Are the standards of most likely and more likely than not the same?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Objection, Your Honor. To the last question, lack of personal knowledge. This witness is a medical doctor, so he isn't firmly aware with the legal standard of more likely than not. And because this is a negligence case where that is the burden, this is outside of Dr. Cannon's personal knowledge.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
You may.
I was not asking Dr. Cannon about the legal standards of more likely than not. Simply when he conducted his investigation, when he used the phrasing most likely, whether or not he meant that that cause was more likely than not in determining the factors of today's case. I wasn't asking him about a legal standard, just about the standard he used when he wrote his report.
Your Honor,
Yes, Ms. Frankie, if you could respond on that.
Yes, Your Honor. If defense counsel wants to ask if this was the most likely, she is more than well equipped to do so. However, because the standard in today's case is more likely than not, this is confusing the issue. And in this case, because it's a legal term, Dr. Cannon does not have that knowledge.
Ms. Frankie, I think your objection is appreciated. However, I do believe that we're not Dr. Cannon is not testifying as to any form of legal standard specifically, regardless of if the terminology may be the same. So with that, I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Dr. Cannon, I'll ask again. When you used the words most likely, Did you mean them as the same as more likely than not?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor. I just ask that my witness be able to step down.
Yes, Dr. Cannon. Or well, any recross, Ms. Frankie?
No, Your Honor.
Yes, Dr. Cannon, you are excused. Now, does defense counsel have any further witnesses to present for us?
No, Your Honor. With that, the defense rests.
Now, timekeepers, could you let me know what our time looks like in terms of when all losses?
We are not sure about the all loss time. Does the plaintiff know?
I think it's around 12:45 if my timekeeper.
12:45. Well, then let's go ahead and take a 5-minute recess. We'll say 6 minutes. I'll see y'all at 12:20 if that works. I'm in Eastern time zone.
Yes, Your Honor.
Perfect. Are representatives from the plaintiff and defense counsel here?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor, we're here.
Perfect. With that, would the plaintiff like to present closing arguments?
Yes, Your Honor.
Awesome.
May I
Ms. Fra-
proceed?
yes, of course, Ms. Frankie, you may.
May it please the court. An accident waiting to happen. June 8th, 2019 should have been the happiest day of Genesis Petrillo's life. But he never made it. He never said his vows. He never even took another breath. Because on June 7th, he took a deadly sip. Genesis didn't know what he was drinking. He didn't know there were pesticides inside that bottle, pesticides that should not have been there, pesticides that were deadly, pesticides that were there because of that defendant's actions, and pesticides that cost him his life. That is why we, the estate of Genesis Petrillo, have filed a claim against Peony Estates for negligence. As the plaintiff, we bear the burden of proof, and we had to meet that burden by preponderance of the evidence, or simply more likely than not. Now the judge will explain to you that in today's case, we are dealing with the specific claim of negligence per se. We had to show that the defendant broke a health and safety statute, and as a result, a person suffered harm. And we have shown that Peony Estates broke safety statutes intended to keep all of us safe from pesticides. And as a result, Genesis Petrillo lost his life. We have met our burden. We have shown that this was an accident waiting to happen, and an accident that caused Genesis to lose his life. So let's talk about it. You heard the evidence. You know this was an accident waiting to happen. Starting in 2015, Ms. O'Keefe did an inspection of Peony Estates, and she found problems. And she told you what those problems were. That Peony Estates was storing pesticides too close to the bottling area and too close to the kitchen. And she told you what the problem with that was: the danger of contamination. But when Miss O'Keefe returned in 2018, she talked to Austin Lewis. And Austin Lewis told her that employees weren't putting pesticides in the proper shed, in the safe shed. Why not? Because it was too far away from for them. And they couldn't be bothered to put pesticides that could kill someone, in the safe space. Peony Estates knew they were having problems, but despite this, when Miss O'Keefe returned in 2019, she didn't find one health code violation. She didn't find 2 or 3. No, she found 4 health code violations. She found open canisters of pesticides laying in the bottling areas. And when she asked employees why the improper storage of pesticides that could kill someone was bad, they couldn't answer her. And then she saw a bottle of pesticides laying right next to a bottle of 2019 Cara wine. And Miss O'Keefe knew how dangerous this situation was. She told an employee to dispose of that bottle immediately because it could be contaminated with pesticides. But when Miss O'Keefe returned on May 23rd, 22 days later, there was that exact same type of wine in that exact same spot. Now the defense will tell you that they did the best they could. that they weren't improperly storing pesticides. But that 2019 bottle of Cara wine, the bottle that the defendant repeatedly stored incorrectly, that's the wine Genesis drank on June 7th. And when Dr. Kwan met him in the emergency room that night, Dr. Kwan knew. Because Genesis Petrillo had contracted pupils and a slow pulse, this wasn't alcohol poisoning. This was something much more serious. It was pesticide poisoning. So he began to administer an antidote, but it was too late, and Genesis Petrillo passed away. But Dr. Kwan followed up, and he ran some tests, and those tests showed him what he already knew, that Genesis Petrillo had pesticides in his system, and those pesticides killed him because this was an accident waiting to happen. And you also heard from Mr. Danny Francasio. And Danny told you that he had to remind Harper repeatedly when she had question after question of proper pesticide safety that pesticides are dangerous, that pesticides could kill someone, because this was an accident waiting to happen. The real tragedy today is that Genesis Petrillo should still be here. He should be alive and living a happy life, but he's not, because they killed him. They improperly stored pesticides, and as a result, Genesis lost his life. Find them liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frankie. Would defense counsel, Ms. Fitzsimmons, would you like to give a closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
Awesome. You may proceed when you're ready.
Narrowed views, biased results. On June 7th, 2019, Casey and Genesis, a young couple, were ready to stand in front of all of their friends and family and promise to spend the rest of their lives together. But instead of walking down that aisle, Genesis spent the next morning in the hospital taking his last breaths. Understandably, his family has been thrown into terrible grief. We all want to know what happened, but we can't accept just any answer, and that's why the plaintiffs just stood before you and asked you to do. But what's the problem when you start with the answer instead of the facts? It's an accident waiting to happen. Today, the plaintiff had the burden of proof. They had to prove to you that it was more likely than not that Peony Estates violated the Midlands Building Code, a statute which is meant to protect from public exposure to pesticide ingestion. They had to prove to you that it was more likely than not that Peony Estates violated this statute. And not only that they possibly failed this burden, not that it was equally as likely that they violated the statute, but more likely than not that they violated the statute. The plaintiff has not met this burden because they cannot meet this burden. They presented all of their evidence. They've called all of their witnesses, and still today we are left with more questions than answers. First, when did the pesticides get into the wine? You heard today that winemaking is a three-step process. You grow the grapes, you turn the grapes into the wine, and you bottle the wine. And the plaintiff has shown you no evidence of when the pesticides got in the wine. They just want you to take their word for it that they did. Today, the plaintiff told you that they tested a wine bottle. More specifically, they tested the Cara wine bottle that Genesis drank from that night. They said when they tested this wine bottle, it came back positive for high levels of pesticides. But members of the jury, they fished that wine bottle out of a trash can where pesticides were thrown out the day before. These pesticide cans were open and leaking in the trash. It's no wonder that when the wine bottle was tested, it was contaminated. They can't tell you when it was contaminated. Second, we're left asking what caused Genesis's death. They have not proven to you today that the pesticides were the direct and proximate cause of Genesis's death. They had to prove to you that but for ingesting the pesticides, Genesis would not have passed away. But you heard from Dr. Cannon that Genesis's BAC was 0.16 when his blood was tested, and almost certainly higher earlier that night. Dr. Kwan, the plaintiff's own expert, told you that the organophosphate pesticides can interact negatively with alcohol, and that this negative interaction makes pesticide symptoms more severe and exaggerated. Even a small amount of pesticides can cause severe symptoms when mixed with the amount of alcohol in Genesis's system. But still, Dr. Kwan made no mention in determining cause of death, because narrowed views lead to biased results. Third, we're left asking, what part of the statutes did Peony Estates violate? The plaintiff today had to prove to you that Peony Estates violated the Midlands Building Code. But did you see the statute today? Did they show it to you? They put together a whole trial today trying to convince you that Peony Estates violated a statute they won't show you. Why didn't they show it to you? Because if you were to read it and see it, you would know there's no violation. But they just want you to take their word for it that a violation occurred. You see, this statute says that pesticides are allowed in production and bottling areas. It's necessary to keep pests out. They just can't be stored there. And members of the jury today, all the plaintiff has proved to you is that pesticides were present in production and bottling areas. They have not been able to prove to you that pesticides were stored in production and bottling areas. They have not proven to you any violation. Members of the jury, we can understand a family in grief desperate for answers. We can understand the need for closure. But what we cannot understand is starting with the answers and desperately trying to apply the facts. The plaintiff's narrowed views led to biased results. They simply have not and cannot meet their burden. And for that reason, we ask you to find the defendant, Peony Estates, not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fitzsimmons. Ms. Frankie, do you have a rebuttal for us today?
Yes, Your Honor.
And you may proceed.
Thank you. Members of the jury, the only cause of death that the defense's expert could state accounted for the pesticides in Genesis system, well, that's pesticide poisoning. Pesticide poisoning that occurred because of Peony Estates' repeated, irresponsible, and negligent actions that were reported by Ms. O'Keefe. Peony Estates violated safety statutes, and they put people at risk. They put Genesis at risk. They killed him. Find them liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frankie. At this point, we have concluded our trial today. To my two scoring judges, if you could please send me a message or say something, come unmute yourself and let me know when y'all have finished your ballots. As for my scoring judges, there should be a submit button at the bottom of your ballots in which you will select submit, and then it'll ask you to confirm it. And then as soon as you guys have done so, if y'all could let me know, and I can go ahead and get those ballots shipped out to the tournament directors.
Mine's good, Mason.
Who was that?
That was Javier.
Javier, perfect.
I'm submitted. All good.
Perfect. I will go ahead and send a text over to them. If y'all could sit tight for just one moment, and I'll let you know we can proceed with some comments. Perfect. Okay. If I can have my two scoring judges come onto the screen, as well as all of the competitors, that way we can We can talk to y'all. We can see your face. We don't feel like we're just like yelling into a wall. Perfect. Okay, so y'all have heard from me for the past 2.5 hours. So I'm going to go ahead and let my scoring judges go ahead and introduce themselves and give you guys comments.
Javier, you want to start?
I was about to ask you, but sure, I'll start. My name is Javier Gonzalez. I'm a 3L right now. I did AMTA for 2 years. I coached for 3 years, and I was an attorney all that time. So my comments are more geared towards attorneys because there's a few things that, like, if you don't say it right, it'll throw you off. But Daniel, why don't you introduce yourself, then we can jump into comments.
Hi, y'all. I'm Daniel Sanders. I competed for UT Dallas and Miami, Ohio, and I now help out with UTD's team. So I have been spending a lot of time with this case, just like you guys.
Okay, well, I guess just a couple general comments. Both teams' themes I didn't think really carried through the whole way. It would have been better if, like, I know one was like accident and then the other was narrow views lead to biased results. I didn't really see that through the witnesses. I saw it open, I saw it closed, how you're supposed to do it, but other than that, like, it would be nice to like hear that throughout. The other general comment would be look at the camera when you're, especially in Zoom, because, like, I don't know if you were reading or if you were looking at a witness or the judge or whatever, but if you look at the camera, it's very clearly like you're looking at the camera, right? And I'll try to be brief in my comments. Plaintiff opener, and typically I would have y'all's names, but I think it was Azam, right? Mr. Azam. So you have a problem that I had, which is like when you're a very good speaker, you have this nice tone to it, but the problem is that you have that tone constantly. So that constant tone kind of takes away from how good of a speaker you are. So to do that, you kind of have to like modulate your voice and like slow down at points and then talk louder. But you have a very good tone, and if you want to really like sell it, you need that little variance. And then defense opener, I thought you did a great job explaining the burden, which kind of made it like set the whole theme for the trial. Like, hey, they got to prove this, And then witness one for plaintiff. I thought when you were on direct, it was kind of, I want to say robotic, but it was definitely rehearsed. But once you started into cross, like, you were very clearly like more comfortable. You were talking more. It was more of a conversation. But to that end, you did get a little combative on cross. And I think you were just the health inspector, right? Well, yeah, yeah. So you're just a health inspector. So like, you don't really have a dog in the fight. And it made it seem like you're very biased. And, defense counsel on cross kind of got you to that point. One thing for attorneys is you can't mix language when you're objecting. There's one objection, I think it was hearsay or something, but then you brought in language that you would typically use for another objection. And that, that just confuses the judge, confuses everyone. And you just look like you don't look tight in your language, which is what you want to look like when you're objecting. And then plaintiff two, Azam, I think you conceded too early on the constructive redaction. I think as an attorney, you should always like fight to like win. And then when the judge rules against you, then be like, Your Honor, we can happily constructively redact, to cure this objection. But, just kind of fight for it. And then another point on the tight language, you offer exhibits into evidence, not for evidence. And then there's a difference between exclusion and exceptions for hearsay. An exclusion is 801 because that's not hearsay. An exception is it's hearsay, but we're letting it in. I thought the witness was really cool, calm, and collected. It was the competing winemaker. I don't see him on the screen, but I love that witness. He just seemed like a bro who I told my friend, I was like, it's a frat guy who likes wine, not beer. So I thought that was a hilarious witness. Witness three, the doctor, you were just how I would imagine an ER doctor would be. So that was on point. You did talk a little bit fast, and with Zoom, it's kind of Zoom and older judges, you're going to get, points against you because they just won't hear you. And then kind of more to the mock trial part, like play the game, because you could see that they were running out of time. So like pause and be like, huh, or like, like take your time to screw up the other team. It sounds terrible, but it's a game. It's how you play. And then for the crosser, it sucks that you ran out of time. I wasn't aware of like whose fault it was, but that always sucks. I'm sorry that happened. And then defense case in chief. So one point that kind of caught me, that really zoned me in, was the speculation objections. Because speculation doesn't mean, a speculation objection isn't an objection to you guessing about something or speculating. Speculating specifically is going into the mindset of someone else. And so on the other side, the defense attorney caught on to that, made a good speculation objection because they were going into the mindset of someone being annoyed. But when you ask a hypothetical, that's not speculation. I mean, it could be improper opinion, it could be relevance, but it's not lack of personal knowledge / speculation. Witness 1 was very likable for defendant. I forget who it was, but I just wrote down very likable. And then witness 2 was also very likable, like nice, sweet. Like, I think you're just a caterer, and like, you just seem like the caterer. You're just doing your job. The one thing that I would have watched out for on the crossing attorney was the improper opinions for health code violations. Because like she was talking about, there's no healthcare violations, there's nothing this, nothing that. That's like totally improper opinion. And then you were kind of caught off guard on cross because she said, you said, hi, I'm gonna ask you some questions. She was like, hi, how are you? And you just kind of went right into your cross, which is like, I get it, this is Zoom, like it's competition, but like people want to see you be, a person, like not on a script, just like talking. And that happened again with like the email. She was like, do you want me to read this? And you just kind of went to another question. Witness 3, you're cool, calm, and collected. And then the one thing I do have to say on that one was the last objection. I think it was Miss Frank. She kind of gave you a signal that this was her last question. She was like, so in conclusion or something. So on that, always be ready to object to something. But I wouldn't have objected to, I think you did hearsay.
It should have been more of a 403.
Yeah, misleading, absolutely. Misleading, improper opinion, something like that. And then, man, I thought you were going for the impeachment. I got so excited. I didn't know what happened, but I was like, we're going for an impeachment.
I had 2 minutes left of my cross.
That's what I thought. But when you have 2 minutes, impeach and sit down, because you don't need another point at that point. You just said that this person is lying, right? That's a stronger point than, I don't even remember what the last question was. So impeachments always score points, always. But you lose points if you botch it, basically. Your cross is good, but I'm just saying, like, gotta watch for that. And then the closings, I thought you gave a very good closing. The theme needed to be carried through. Would have saved more time for rebuttal. 40 seconds is not a lot of time to like make a good point. And then defense closing, I didn't think they didn't show you the statute was very convincing. I don't need to show the jury like the negligence standard statute or whatever state law is, right? As long as I tell you and you don't object because it's like I'm lying. I don't know. I just didn't think, you gave a good closing, but that was just one point that stuck out. Like, it wasn't really convincing. But other than that, I thought you all did a really good job. I'm harsh on my critiques because I like knowing what I did wrong, but you all did things very well, very clearly. You know what you're doing. So good job and good luck next round.
I'll be quick and painless with y'all. I think everyone can slow down. Really, when you're arguing your objections, we tend to say those buzz phrases, those things that we know are the scripted phrases of goes into mindset is big, or not offering it for the truth of the matter, but subsequent action. Those phrases, you really need to keep them clean because they mean something. They're not just phrases we put in to make ourselves sound lawyery. So when you're arguing, slow down. You can breathe. It's okay. We get it. So just everybody, even witnesses talked real fast that I didn't get to appreciate what you were saying because it was already next point. So flow. Statements were fantastic. Eye contact was amazing. I have terrible eye contact because my camera's here and all of you are over here. So good job with your setups. I know it's hard this year with the Zoom format, but you did amazing with keeping eye contact. I actually felt like it was a real round, you know, in person because I remember Miss Pike, when you got up to cross, you had that level of confidence in your voice on your first question that commanded the courtroom. And I felt like I was like, oh yeah, it's a real round. Got it. And so you kept me engaged. And I think that that's super important this year is staying engaged. So slow down, draw some drama, and clean things up. And y'all will be great for this season. Good job.
Thank you. To introduce myself, my name is Mason. I did mock trial for 4 years at Furman University. Before that, did 4 years of high school mock trial, mostly as an attorney. I had a brief stint as an expert witness that perhaps didn't go as well as one would expect, or perhaps exactly as how one would expect an attorney playing a witness. A few general comments. I do want to echo, I believe this was Javier's comment about themes. I actually enjoyed both of the themes. Like I thought that like y'all said them, I knew that exactly what they were, and I got an idea of what you guys were trying to prove with them. That being said, like off the top of my head, someone who's only, you know, seen this case 2 times before this, like I could find ways to put these themes in. So for example, the defense expert could most certainly talk about the narrow views of Dr. Kwan and how because of those narrow views, he had a biased result as to what happened. For the other team, hold on, I have y'all's theme on an accident waiting to happen. You guys had the health inspector who I think would have been perfect to kind of talk about these violations. If they're left unchecked, like that is an accident waiting to happen. And I think as you put it in, you can even make it very obvious to us that you're repeating your theme. One other thing on objections, and Javier kind of pointed it out, there's no clock. Like take your time, figure out exactly what you're going to say. It doesn't look good when you stumble over things. And also think about exactly what objection you were making. There were several points in which like part of me really wanted to say, I'm going to sustain this objection for something else that you didn't object to. Or perhaps maybe a response that I wanted to let, like there were some documents, specifically Mr. Azam, some of those emails where I think there are ways you can get the entire thing in, and that I wanted to let you get the entire thing in, but the specific things that you argued, I wasn't believing were correct. Fun note, I believe, it's one of the defense witnesses, spick and spam. I don't think you want spam on a countertop when you're cleaning things. I believe the term is spick and span with an N, but that's fun. And obviously I didn't score. I just thought it was very fun. One more comment from Javier, the statutes. If you believe that they didn't explain what the law is and that the law actually helps you out because you didn't violate it, instead of just telling us that they didn't show us what the law is, tell us what the law is or what the statute is and why they didn't do it. And I think by saying they didn't show you, especially when Ms. Frankie had the opportunity to come up later, just opened the door for her to tell you exactly what that law was and why it mattered. It's just one of the things, the nature of her having the last word at the end of it as the plaintiff. Otherwise, I have a whole bunch of other comments, a lot of comments about like specific objections that were made throughout the trial. I'll be staying here. I suspect perhaps the other 2 scoring judges will as well. But with that, that's about all I have, and y'all are free to leave or stay and ask questions or whatever y'all choose to do.
Thank y'all for judging.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you guys so much. That was
Of
really
course. Of course, we enjoy judging.